Hey folks, welcome to another episode of Road Hard Restorations. My name's Steve, working in my home garage, and on this episode I'm going to show you how I installed the Borgeson power steering conversion kit in my 1967 Ford Mustang. So this Mustang was originally equipped with power steering from the factory. I did convert it over to manual steering before converting it back to the Borgeson system. So the reason why I did that is because this system does not use any of the original Ford power steering components, and you have to buy a manual steering adapter to go on your power steering center link to replace the control valve. I didn't want to go through that, so I went ahead and purchased a new center link and pitman arm to convert it to full manual steering, eliminating all of the original power steering components. Then installing the box was a pretty much straightforward bolt-in part. The kit comes with everything you need except for a belt and fluids, naturally. Power steering pump just goes on just like any other power steering pump. There's a bracket with 2 bolts. It comes with the 2 power steering hoses. Those were pre-bent and they fit right in. The box was just a bolt-in affair as well. I did have one issue though with the box fitting. I could not get all the 3 of the bolts to go in through the frame rail all at the same time. I called Borgeson on that and they said, yeah, you do have to clearance the box. Sometimes there's an issue with variances in the casting. And so for it to fit all the way down on top of the frame rail, you did have to clearance the box a little bit. And they said that's just fine. Just a little bit of the flash casting on the box itself bolts into the factory location. The pitman arm bolted right to the box. It does come with the rag joint, the bushing or seal on the bottom of the column. It comes with the steering shaft. It was all pretty much a straightforward install. Be careful about measuring and cutting of the steering column tube. I like to pre-assemble everything on the bench, so I set up the box, put the rag joint on the box, seat it in all the way, take the steering shaft, seat it into the rag joint all the way, put the steering wheel on, and tighten the nut. Then you can measure from the steering wheel to the top of the rag joint, minus the distance of the thickness of the seal on the bottom of the column. Then you also want to minus a little bit of clearance between the rag joint and the seal. So once you have that measurement, then you transfer that over to the column and make your cut. You want to make sure your cut is square. I just used a metal chop saw, but if all you have is a Sawzall, just put a hose clamp around the line where you want to cut, and then use that as your guide. So the power steering pump installation is pretty straightforward. It's got 2 bolts. I did have to clearance the back of the bracket to clear the fuel pump. Depending on who made your fuel pump, what style you have, you may or may not have an issue with that. I actually ground a little bit on the pump and a little bit on the back of the bracket for clearance so that everything will fit flush. Hoses and fitting, everything worked out really well. No issues there. Pretty straightforward install. If you've installed a power steering pump, this really isn't much different than anything else. Yeah, horn button from the Mustang is pretty easy. It's kind of fun and noisy. There's a spring behind the button. We'll need to pull this nut off and then yank the wheel. Alright, I got the nut loosened with my 15/16 socket. Next step is pull the wheel off. I usually leave the nut kind of on there a little bit, and then try to just knock the wheel back. That keeps it from flying into your face. But if it doesn't come loose, then you'll need one of these. It's just a, you can call it a steering wheel puller, but I use it for all sorts of things. Essentially just find 2 opposite ends in a straight line to match the hole configuration on whatever you're pulling, whether it's a balancer or steering wheel or gear or whatever else you have. You want these threaded in the same amount, otherwise you'll pull it at an angle. Make sure it's centered. And then start tightening it down in the middle. That's all it took. Like I said, keeping that nut on there keeps the wheel from falling off in your lap. So now, pull this off. Okay, behind the steering wheel here on these Mustangs and other Fords like it, and I'm sure a lot of other vehicles too, there's this big heavy spring. It keeps the bearing and the bearing race inside there from popping out and getting loose, causing your steering wheel to move. I am going to test a theory that that spring is too tight and pulling the shaft up, causing the coupler to deflect and rub up against the rubber seal at the bottom of the column tube, causing my steering wheel input to not come back to center because it's meeting resistance there as if you're holding onto the wheel. So when you're driving and you turn the wheel and you let go, it just stays there because of that little bit of resistance. And just a minute ago, I don't know if you saw that, I pushed on here and it actually moved a little bit. So I think I'm going to try that without the spring, and if that works, I'm going to find a lighter spring or cut this one down, because we just need to keep the that bearing in place. I don't think it really needs a whole lot of preload. So I'm going to go ahead and put the steering wheel back on. Now if I was smart, I would have marked it where I took it off. I think I need to move it just a little bit this way. We'll see, because the steering wheel was on crooked. The thing is with this Borgeson steering shaft, does not have an index on here because it can go any way in the coupler. So I'm going to leave it like that. I'll put the horn back on here. I'll put my spring in here so I lose it. These are always fun to put back on because the horn blows. You can always disconnect the battery, but that's no fun. And get everything lined up. Once you feel it, you should be able to just, there you go, turn it into place. See, without that spring there, I can already feel the play. If it doesn't fix my return to center problem, then it's a good chance that I need to add more caster into the front end alignment. Let's take it for a drive. Okay, I got back from the test drive. Taking that spring out of the column did not seem to solve the issue. It did help a little bit, and I think I'm still going to find a lighter spring to put in there, because with the spring gone, the steering column is really loose. What I did also after that, came back, loosened the two nuts that hold the column in. I was able to slide the column tube up a little bit. It did actually closed up this gap a little bit here, so that's good. If this gap is way too tight or it's hitting your steering wheel, you'll probably need to wind up having to trim the bottom of the column just a little bit more so you have some clearance there. So what that does, sliding the column up or taking that spring out or trimming the column, will give you a gap here. So between the coupler and the bottom of the column, you want a little bit of space there, because when that coupler is rubbing up against that rubber seal at the bottom of the column, it acts as a steering wheel input. So the power steering is really sensitive, and so it acts as if you're still holding onto the wheel. So when you turn, it just thinks you're still holding the wheel because of that resistance it's rubbing up against the rubber there. If you can't get that proper gap there, you may need to trim the end of the column again. So after making all these adjustments to the steering column, making sure there's no binding, everything's lining up just fine, I'm still having an issue with the car not returning to center as well as I would like, so which means a trip to the alignment shop. Before I do that though, I'm going to go ahead and adjust the strut rods, trying to move those lower control arms forward to give me some more caster. And then I also have an adjustment on the upper control arm I can do too. I can put a couple of shims in the front of each side to try to move that ball joint back a little bit on the upper control arms. See if that'll remedy the issue. If not, then there are some aftermarket upper control arms that has caster built into them. It actually relocates the upper ball joints rearward in the control arm. The Mustang stock upper control arms are symmetrical, so having the caster built into the control arm should remedy the issue. lower control arms, I can move them forward, like I said, by adjusting those strut rods. So I'm going to see if I can make that adjustment and then take it on another test drive at a later time, and hopefully that fixes it. Otherwise, it's $500 in parts for upper control arms and another trip to the alignment shop. So we'll post a update on that in the future. I hope you enjoyed this overview of the installation of the Borgeson power steering system. If you have any questions, go ahead and leave them down in the comments. Be sure to share, like, and subscribe. I try to post a video every Wednesday. Next week, I'm going to go over the installation of the bucket seats from ProCar that I have installed in this Mustang. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next one.